The mansion gates had barely opened when Adaiza Ifeoma dropped to her knees in the gravel driveway, her hands trembling as she tried to steady the wheelchair that had just tipped sideways, spilling its occupant onto the hard stone path in the blazing afternoon sun. Nobody rushed to help. From the balcony above, Mrs. Patience Okoro watched with her arms folded and a smirk curling her lips, sipping her chilled juice as though watching a show. "Useless girl," she called down. "You can't even push a chair properly. My husband would have been better off in the streets than under your care." Adaiz said nothing. She simply gathered the frail, silent man in her arms, steadying his head, whispering an apology only he could feel through her touch. Since Otumba Emeka, Okoro had not spoken a word or heard a sound in nearly 3 years. Before we continue this heart-touching story, if you believe that kindness always finds its reward and that everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, drop a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Whispering Tales Stories so you never miss a story like this one. 6 months earlier, Adaiz had walked through those same gates with nothing but a faded nylon bag containing 2 wrappers, a photograph of her late mother, and a heart still raw from grief. She had grown up in Niue, the last child of a widow who sold groundnuts by the roadside to keep her only daughter in school until senior secondary. When her mother passed from an illness the local clinic couldn't name, Adaiz had nothing left but debts and a silence that swallowed her whole. A distant aunt who cleaned houses in Lagos mentioned that the Okoro family, one of the wealthiest in Ikoyi, needed a live-in caregiver for the master of the house, who had suffered a stroke that left him paralyzed on one side and completely deaf. Desperate, Adaiz took the 3-day journey to the city with the little money she had, praying the job would still be open when she arrived. It was Mrs. Okoro who interviewed her, though interviewed was a generous word for the cold inspection that followed. "Patience." Okoro looked her up and down as though appraising a second-hand wrapper at the market, noting her worn slippers and the calluses on her palms with open disdain. "You'll clean him, feed him, change him, and keep him quiet," she said flatly. "He can't hear you, can't talk back, can't do anything for himself. Frankly, I don't know why I bother keeping him here instead of a proper facility, but appearances must be maintained." There was no warmth in how she spoke of her husband, only the practiced irritation of someone managing an inconvenience rather than mourning a partner. Adaiz had nodded quietly and accepted the position, unaware that the true trial of her life was only beginning. The mornings were the hardest. Otumba Okoro, once a towering shipping magnate known across Lagos ports for his booming voice and firm handshake, could now only communicate through his eyes and the small movements of his good hand. Adaiz learned quickly that patience was not just her name but the discipline the job demanded from her every single day. She learned to read the flicker in his eyes when the porridge was too hot, the way his fingers curled when he needed the bathroom, the specific press of his palm against hers when he wanted the curtains open to watch the mango tree outside his window, where the previous 2 caregivers had quit within weeks, complaining that the silence of the man made the job feel like caring for a statue. Adaiz found something different. She found a person still fully alive behind eyes that could no longer speak. She began humming to him while she worked, not because he could hear her, but because the vibration in her chest as she leaned close to adjust his pillows seemed to comfort him, and slowly she noticed his shoulders would relax at her touch. She started writing simple words on a small whiteboard, teaching herself which letters made him smile, which questions made his eyes well with unexpected tears. It was through this whiteboard that she first understood the depth of his loneliness. One afternoon, 3 months into her employment, she had written, "Are you happy?" almost as a passing thought, and watched his one working hand shake as he wrote back a single word. "No." Adaiz had sat beside his bed that evening long after her shift ended, simply holding his hand, letting him know that at least in that room, in that moment he was not invisible. Mrs. Okoro's cruelty, however, only sharpened as the weeks passed. She mocked Adaiz in front of guests, calling her the village girl, playing nurse, and then once poured a glass of wine deliberately near her feet just to watch her scramble to clean it before it stained the imported rug. She accused Adaiz of stealing when a bracelet went missing, only for the housekeeper to later find it beneath the sofa cushions, though no apology ever came. Worse than the insults directed at Adaze were the ones aimed at Otunba himself, spoken as though he could not comprehend them, though anyone who looked closely could see the pain flash across his still expressive face. "Look at him," Patience would say to her society friends over tea on the veranda. "A shell of the man I married. Sometimes I wonder if it wouldn't be a mercy to just let him go." Adaze would grip the wheelchair, handles tighter during these moments, her jaw clenched, wishing desperately that she could shield him from words that clearly still reached the part of him that remained whole. What none of them knew, not even Patience, was that Otunba Okoro's mind had never been touched by his stroke. His body had betrayed him. His hearing had vanished in the same medical storm that paralyzed half his frame, but his intellect, his memory, his awareness of every cruel word spoken in that house remained entirely intact. He had simply lost the ability to prove it. Doctors had told the family early on that recovery of speech was unlikely and further tests were not a priority, given his condition, and Patience, eager to move forward with her own plans for his considerable estate, had never pushed for further evaluation. It was Adaze noticing how his eyes tracked conversations, how his hand trembled with something like fury when insulted, who began to suspect that everyone had given up on him far too soon. Determined, she used her modest savings to visit a small clinic in Yaba that specialized in stroke rehabilitation, where a kind therapist named Dr. Ugochi listened to her descriptions of Otunba's responsiveness and agreed to visit the house under the guise of a routine wellness check. What she discovered stunned everyone. Otunba's paralysis was significant but not absolute, and with months of consistent, patient therapy exercises, targeted especially at the muscles of his throat and jaw, there was a real possibility he could regain some speech and even partial hearing through a procedure his previous doctors had never mentioned, perhaps because no one had ever advocated hard enough to ask. Adaze began the exercises immediately, spending her nights after Patience retired to bed working gently with him, whispering encouragement he could not yet hear but could feel in the warmth of her hands and the persistence of her presence. Word of Adaze's dedication eventually reached her aunt, who worked in a neighboring estate, and rumors began to swirl among the household staff of Ikoyi that the crippled master of the Okoro house was somehow improving under the poor maid's care. Patience dismissed it as foolish gossip, too consumed with planning a lavish anniversary gathering meant to showcase her status among Lagos's elite, an event she intended to use, unknown to anyone, to formally announce her intentions to have her husband declared incompetent and moved permanently into a care facility, freeing her to manage his assets entirely on her own. The day of the gathering arrived under a bright, unforgiving sun, guests filling the compound in agbada and lace, admiring the floral arrangements, and the abundance of jollof rice and grilled fish laid out on long tables. Patience stood at the center of it all, glowing with practiced elegance, preparing to deliver her carefully rehearsed announcement about her husband's care. She gestured toward Otunba, seated in his wheelchair near the edge of the gathering, and began speaking of difficult decisions made out of love, her voice dripping with performative sorrow as she hinted at moving him somewhere more appropriate for his condition. It was at that exact moment, with nearly 100 guests watching, that Otunba Emeka Okoro placed both hands on the armrests of his wheelchair and, trembling with effort built from months of secret therapy, pushed himself to his feet. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Patience's rehearsed smile collapsed into shock. And then, in a voice hoarse from years of silence but unmistakably clear, he spoke his first words in 3 years directly to his wife. "I have heard everything you have ever said about me, and everything you have ever said about her." He gestured toward Adaze, who stood frozen near the drink table, tears already spilling down her cheeks. "This woman gave me back my life while you were busy planning to throw it away. If this story has touched your heart even a little, please don't scroll away just yet. Let us know in the comments how it made you feel, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness is never wasted." The gathering dissolved into stunned murmurs as Otunba, leaning heavily but standing on his own power, asked his lawyer, who had been quietly invited for exactly this moment, to step forward with documents already prepared over the previous weeks. Within minutes, the true purpose of the day's gathering revealed itself. not an anniversary celebration, but the formal transfer of significant portions of his estate into a trust, one that named Ades Ifeoma not merely as a beneficiary, but as the manager of his continued care and rehabilitation, with Patience's access to his accounts formally and publicly restricted. Patience's protests dissolved into humiliated silence as guests who had once admired her now exchanged uncomfortable glances, whispering about a cruelty they had perhaps always sensed but chosen politely to ignore. Before you go, if the message in today's story stayed with you, type the word grace in the comments below so we know this story reached your heart. And we will see you in the next story right here on Whispering Tales Stories. In the weeks that followed, Otunba's recovery continued steadily, his speech growing stronger, his hearing partially restored through the procedure. Ades had fought to secure for him, and the mansion that had once echoed with cruelty slowly filled, instead with laughter and gratitude. Ades never sought reward for her kindness, never expected the life that unfolded before her, yet found herself, for the first time since her mother's passing, surrounded by a family that saw her fully. And Otunba Okoro, standing tall once more in the home he had nearly lost hope of truly living in, understood that sometimes the people the world overlooks are the very ones who teach us what it means to be seen.